The high desert of New Mexico is a place where the wind tells secrets that humans were never meant to hear. In the summer of 1991, the Henderson family was driving across the lonely stretch of Route 66 in a rusted station wagon. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Miles of red sand and twisted sagebrush surrounded them, with no gas stations or streetlights in sight. A heavy, unnatural silence settled over the car, broken only by the rhythmic humming of the old tires against the cracked asphalt. Mark, the father, gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white as the shadows lengthened across the road. He had heard the local legends about the Navajo Skinwalkers, ancient witches who could shed their humanity to become something monstrous. People said they could outrun a speeding car and mimic the voices of loved ones to lure their prey into the dark. He had always laughed at those stories over a cold beer, calling them campfire tales for tourists. But tonight, gazing into the vast, empty darkness of the desert, those stories didn't feel like jokes anymore. Suddenly, the headlights caught a flash of movement in the brush about 50 yards ahead of the vehicle. It looked like a large coyote, but its proportions were disturbingly wrong, with legs that were far too long for its body. It moved with a jerky, mechanical gait that defied the laws of biology and physics. As the car approached, the creature didn't run away into the safety of the brush like a normal animal would. Instead, it turned its head nearly 180 degrees to stare directly into the windshield with glowing, yellowish eyes. "Did you see that, Mark?" his wife Linda whispered, her voice trembling as she clutched her young daughter closer to her chest. Mark didn't answer. He simply pressed his foot harder on the gas pedal, desperate to put distance between them and that thing. The engine roared in protest, but the speedometer barely climbed, as if the air itself had become thick and heavy like syrup. The creature was now running alongside the car, keeping perfect pace with them effortlessly. It wasn't running on four legs anymore. It was sprinting upright like a man in a costume. The creature's skin looked like a patchwork of different animal furs, stitched together with raw, bloody sinew and dark twine. It had the head of a wolf, but the torso was unmistakably human, with ribs poking through the stretched, sickly skin. There was no tail, and its hands ended in long, jagged human fingernails that scraped against the side of the car. The sound was like a knife dragging across a chalkboard, echoing loudly inside the small cabin. Tommy, sitting in the back seat, began to cry quietly, covering his ears with his small hands. Suddenly, the car's radio flickered to life, emitting a loud burst of static that made everyone jump in their seats. Through the white noise, a voice began to emerge, but it wasn't a radio host or a singer. It was Mark's own voice, clear and calm, coming through the speakers. "Pull over, Mark. The tire is flat. We need to check the tire." Mark looked at his wife in horror because he hadn't opened his mouth to speak. The creature outside was opening its maw, and the sound was projecting directly into the car's electronics. The voice on the radio changed, now mimicking the high-pitched, innocent laughter of their daughter, Chloe, who was sitting right there in the car. "Daddy, look at the pretty doggy outside," the radio Chloe said, followed by a wet, gurgling sound that made Mark's stomach churn. The thing outside was grinning, its mouth filled with too many human teeth crowded into a lupine jaw. It tapped on the glass of the passenger window with a rhythmic, taunting thud. Each tap left a smear of dark, foul-smelling grease on the window, obscuring the family's view. Mark swerved the car, trying to knock the creature back into the ditch, but it hopped onto the roof with a heavy thud. The metal groaned under the weight of something much heavier than a coyote or a man. They could hear the sound of claws digging into the roof, peeling back the paint like it was orange skin. Linda screamed as a long, pale finger poked through the interior ceiling fabric, wiggling around as if searching for a way in. The smell of rotting meat and wet fur began to fill the air. "Don't look at it! Whatever you do, don't look it in the eyes!" Mark shouted, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. He knew the legend said that looking into a skinwalker's eyes allowed it to steal your soul or paralyze your mind. He kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead, which seemed to stretch on forever into a black abyss. The headlights flickered and dimmed, struggling to cut through the oppressive darkness that seemed to be swallowing the car whole. The desert had become a silent witness to their desperate struggle. The car engine began to sputter and cough, as if it were choking on the very air of the desert. Mark realized with a sinking heart that they were running out of fuel, even though the tank had been full. The Skinwalker was draining more than just their courage. It was feeding on the energy of the machine itself. The car slowed to a crawl, and then, with a final pathetic wheeze, the engine died completely. The silence that followed was terrifying, broken only by the heavy, wet breathing coming from the roof above. "Mark, please do something," Linda sobbed, her eyes shut tight as she huddled on the floorboards with their children. The creature slowly slid down from the roof, its face appearing upside down outside the driver's side window. It began to speak again, but this time it wasn't mimicking a voice. It was a guttural, ancient language that sounded like stones grinding together in a deep grave. The air inside the car grew freezing cold, and their breath turned into white mist. The Skinwalker was waiting for them to open the door and surrender. Mark grabbed the heavy flashlight from the glove box, his hands shaking so much he almost dropped it on the floor. He knew he couldn't stay in the car forever, but stepping outside felt like a death sentence in the dark. He looked at his family, seeing the pure terror etched into their faces, and knew he had to try something. He clicked the flashlight on, aiming the beam at the window, but the light seemed to be sucked into the creature's dark, oily skin. It didn't flinch. It only widened its hideous, human-like grin. Outside, more shapes began to emerge from the darkness of the sagebrush, their eyes glowing like embers in a dying fire. The first Skinwalker wasn't alone. It had brought its pack to witness the feast of a suburban American family. They surrounded the car in a perfect circle, standing tall on their hind legs like a twisted parody of a welcoming committee. The sound of their collective breathing was like a rhythmic chant, vibrating through the metal frame of the station wagon. The family was trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. Just as the creature began to shatter the driver's side window with a heavy blow, a pair of bright white lights appeared in the distance. A massive semi-truck was roaring down the highway, its air horn blasting a deafening warning that echoed across the desert floor. The Skinwalkers hissed in unison, their eyes shrinking from the intense glare of the truck's high beams. They hated the light and the noise of civilization, and in a blur of fur and bone, they vanished into the darkness as quickly as they had arrived. The truck driver slowed down, seeing the stalled car, but Mark didn't wait for him to stop completely. He managed to restart the engine with a desperate turn of the key and roared away, leaving the desert far behind. They didn't stop until they reached the bright neon lights of Las Vegas, surrounded by crowds of oblivious people. But Mark knew the truth now. He knew that in the dark corners of the USA, the Skinwalkers were still waiting, watching the roads, and learning how to sound exactly like you.